hear and listen to all the presentation which were before my presentation. And I have to say that much of what I wanted to say has already been so to say, said with some exemptions. So my role, as I defined it for myself, was to make a sort of analysis what exactly is the paradigm of present-day yoga. Whether it's good or bad, it's another thing. And in this case, sometimes I feel that it is a sort of rose in the desert, as you know it from the Little Prince, and that it is something very precious because we don't have another system which is equally profound and always open for us to experience. So when I start this presentation, I have to go a little bit beyond what up to now it has been presented, because whatever experience we do have, it is the experience itself is possible under usual conditions only when we are prepared. What is it we are prepared? I would define it that we are mature enough to really be able to benefit or to have access to this experience. If it happens before, it has no real value because we cannot contextualize it and we cannot really integrate it, so it may cause this integration, and it was already mentioned in the therapeutical context. So nowadays, and I refer to the last year's conference, but also if you take any, well, not any, but the majority of the yoga books, everything is poured into the asana, and through the asana is supposed to have an access to every level of yoga experience. I don't know whether you know, there is a gentleman, it's Italian by name, but it is Mr. Yoga, and he has published, I think, 1,200 asanas, but they are not really asanas because there is a conglomerate of various positions taken from martial arts, from dance, from yoga, and it has very exotic names and so on. So there is a boom of projecting the yoga mainly into the asana area. Now, it has certain advantages, of course, because if you are flexible, it's nice and good. It was already said that if you are young, tall, and very flexible, you look very nice, tall and flexible. So you are very much liked because of your appearance. But as I will try to address this issue next, a little bit later, if you become old, well, this is also natural, and you may have your own advantages before the young, tall, and flexible yoga teachers. And sometimes we hear that asana should have everything, so it is like a bike with the propeller at the end, so it can fly. It is something which should go on effortlessly. It has access to infinite source of power, which every human being has. But of course, just imagine what an ordinary man or woman, ladies or gentlemen, would do if he or she would have access to this infinite power as he or she is. I think that would be a disaster. So we come now to the next point, and that is, it was already mentioned that nowadays quantum physicists and yoga philosophers tend to have certain areas common. And it is because slowly even science discovers that there is a huge nothing, a huge space at the bottom of everything, even though it looks to be solid. And so there is a book which is called the Vijnana Bhairava, which is a Kashmiri Shaiva text. And there Bhairavi, the wife of Bhairava, which is the Shiva, asks Shiva, what is behind all those power elements in the letters, the vibrations of the letters, which is supposed to constitute all the available energy of the universe? And Shiva answers, okay, that's you. If you hear like something like this, you should know that nothing which is specific, nothing which is describable, nothing which is definable defines the essence. Now, this is a difficult concept because, after all, when we are learning yoga, we expect to have some realities, to have something which we can experience, we can learn first of all, and now we have the proposition that, okay, whatever we learn, yes, however flexible we are, but it is not really that good. So there is as if a cover-up in the general yoga field that postural yoga is yoga, and there are so many special expressions which cover the fact that sometimes, I'm not telling about us who have already a sort of step behind this level, but if you go out, for example, in my area, the majority of yoga courses are related to asanas, and very often without any other background which would enable a deepening of the practice. Well, of course, I'm not saying every teacher in my area, which is the V4 area, that means Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and Poland, but it happens very often. Now, it seems to be a sidestep or a cover-up that forces us to project yoga into only one shape, and this is the asana. Now, asana has its own history, and because Iyengar was having at one interview at a conference which happened in 2011 in Rishikesh, that he was telling that at the time when he was starting asanas for health reasons, asanas were not really taken as seriously as should be, according to him, and he decided to change it, so make them famous, which indeed he was very successful with. Now, yoga is a vast area, so I think there is not a single human personality type which would not be able to find a very specific service to his needs. And these needs sometimes are seemingly technical, but like the gentleman sitting there in the water doing a special meditation, it is also something which required dissolution of certain elements of the software which we are using for everyday use, but also for yoga. So when we would like to explore yoga into a greater depth, or you see the question, what is depth? In the presentation, just in the 7-minute presentation, just before my presentation, we heard self-inquiry. That's fine, but where to find the self? And how to make an inquiry? Because the moment we are making an inquiry, we are using all the software which is available to our mind, whether just the thoughts or whether the decision-making part, the buddhi, whatever, but we are still using the same software. So how can you change the game if you are doing the self-inquiry. So this is just a matter of translation of the original concepts. But yes, this is just a slide showing the nice, long, and flexible people doing the work. So, sorry. Nowadays, when yoga becomes a profession or a business, which we already have heard that this happens, and I don't know whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, but if you are a yoga professional, that means you have to rely on people coming to you, and if this is the way how you make your living, then you know how many money you need per month to be able to survive, and that may be a limiting concept in being able to reach the depths, because you are always kept on this, so to say, survival level 2, and that's a very difficult position. So we already spoke about what is at this ease in one of the discussions, and we also spoke about the phenomena that more and more you are supposed to be ill. So either you have to have a choice. In our area, I don't know how it is in the UK, but you go to a physician, he would take your blood, make your measurements, what he or she can do. Then you come back, the physician opens the computer, puts in the diagnosis, and immediately he or she gets the prescribed drugs which you are supposed to take. Now, what it is if not a business? Or if you have a heart problem, arrhythmia, then there is a whole industry of heart surgeons who will make ablation to you, which doesn't solve the problem, but it's a huge industry. So the problem of using yoga as a therapy is also in a way linked to the number of ill people or people who are considering themselves to be ill. Because you know, we heard that during the discussion that if a person comes who doesn't have one leg, just a prosthetic leg, or is blind or deaf, now, oh yes. So, fine. So I will go to the next point. Iyengar, before his departure, said that commercialization of yoga, it indeed disturbs me. So he realized after all, because at the end of one's life, one realizes quite a lot of things, that yoga is something far more than can be offered on a commercial basis. So when we go to the way how old yogis described what yoga is depending on, so always it is the balance of various types of energies. Once Swami Vedavarati, who was a very sweet person, he said when he was having a course on Shiva Sutra, which is again a Kashmiri Shaiva text, that you know, if you experience this madhya state, which is when in your center you are just radiating something which can't be described, all the other procedures are irrelevant. So all these balances happen automatically. Well, may this be our case, that we will all experience it. And so the recipe is relatively simple. There are, in fact, two concepts. And one concept is the personalized self, the ahamkara. It contains all the information about you, and it regulates all the procedures and everything which you have to meet or you do not have to meet in your life, and all the software and hardware which you need for everyday or yoga life. Yes, the last sentence. But if you really are intent to reach this state which yogis emphasis for us, then you have to forget all of that. You see, to make it personal, because this seems to be impersonal, once I met a yogi who was really a very, very interesting yogi. So he worked on such a manner that you had to intend or have to pose him some of your problems. So I said in my mind that, please, could you help a little bit with this meditation for me, because I'm not satisfied. And then suddenly, like a sort of chimney, and the crucial point was that in this chimney, one could come up to a point, and then it was a horrible thing. You had to forget and let behind everything, everything. You couldn't take there, like if you are dead. You couldn't take anything. So that's the turning point. If we are willing to let it go, because we assume that, okay, I let go all this, but there is a value on the other side, so to say, and when you return, then you are the same person, but a little bit different, because this madhyama state is already in you. So this is what I would like to wish to all of you, that you discover this fantastic thing for which really you don't need anything except willingness, patience, and maturity, to which we all have to get to. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Debbie. Yeah, and thank you to the IYN for inviting me. I should probably reiterate, I speak purely for myself here, but I do teach at the OCHS, and I guess that gives me something to fall back on, because although yoga is a vast subject, there's only so much one can say about it, and a lot of people have said a lot of very relevant things. So I've been crossing things out as I go, and hopefully my talk is now a little bit more focused. I'm going to fall back on the ancient texts. However, that raises a lot of questions in itself, because one has to ask how relevant they are to what we do today. What is yoga in terms of today, and what is yoga in terms of old texts is not necessarily the same. So let's get to the question. What is yoga? I've seen it up on the screen a few times and heard people talking about it. There's generally a consensus, which obviously is well summed up by Patanjali. Yoga is a meditative state beyond the mind. So put that in simple English, sit down and shut up. So thanks. I suppose I should try and say some more, but that really is the point. There really isn't a great deal more to add. If we fast forward sort of 1,000 years from Patanjali to the Hatha Pradipika, I mean, it says very straightforwardly, you don't get anywhere in yoga by talking about it. So again, I'll try and get out of this slightly onerous task of standing up in front of you trying to say something profound about an enormous subject. I think really just to emphasize, as I did at the beginning, talking about success in yoga in traditional terms and success in a modern context, really two very different things. I mean, looking at the old text where there is that consensus, it's not about contortions that look pretty on the internet, it's about disappearing completely from the world for the most part. People talk about stilling the mind when we talk about Patanjali, but his ultimate aim is detachment from matter, and that's effectively disembodiment, or death, to put it more plainly. And the Hatha Pradipika, again, it says something very similar. I'm just going to read a little quote here. The yogi who is completely released from all states and free of all thoughts remains as if dead. He is liberated, of that there is no doubt. Now, Unsurprisingly, we don't hear that very often in modern yoga marketing. Not so easy to sell workshops on spiritual suicide. Of course, we don't today have to take all that literally at face value, or necessarily go all the way. Our priorities are perhaps not the same as those of an Iron Age ascetic being rewritten by Patanjali. And in the Hatha Pradipika itself is a slightly subtler description of what that might mean. A couple of verses later it says, the yogi in samadhi knows neither smell, nor taste, nor form, nor touch, nor sound, nor himself, nor others. Well, although that still sounds pretty otherworldly, it's basically a flashback to the Katha Upanishad, which is the first text that gives a practical definition of yoga, which is restraint of the mind and the senses, and therefore practice of focusing inward. And that same description is repeated again and again and again. You hear it in the Mahabharata, which describes somebody who is engaged in yoga as being motionless like a stone. He neither hears, nor smells, nor tastes, nor sees. He notices no touch, nor does his mind form conceptions. Like a piece of wood, he does not desire anything. Well, on the one hand, no more craving. That's got rid of one of the big problems that causes a lot of misery, but are we aiming to be a piece of wood? Are we aiming to disappear to that extent? And more to the point, if we're not doing that, are we not doing yoga? Perhaps that leads to another question, though. Is yoga something to do or the outcome of doing it? Or even, is it something that isn't done at all, but rather that we have to stop doing so that the state of yoga might arise? Is that really what the old texts were talking about? The ascetics of old were trying to solve a problem in the mind that was getting in the way, as Vyasa describes it, of the underlying state of samadhi. So, to overgeneralize massively, back to the beginning is really what I was saying. Yoga is a state, and it's a state beyond time and space. It's very hard to pin down. And at the same time, that's not the whole story, because other texts come up with other definitions. We've already seen one on screen earlier from the Bhagavad Gita. Yoga is skill in action. That's almost impossible to get further from the idea of disappearing from the world, in a way. And without getting sidetracked by the politics and the history that produced that redefinition of yoga, we can just observe it's different. And that's kind of the problem. It's very hard to pin down a consensus in the yoga tradition. It's actually very hard to find one tradition. There are many different traditions. In fact, it's very hard to find one definition of yoga. If go to a Sanskrit dictionary, I've printed out here the definitions from the Monier-Williams Sanskrit dictionary. There's several dozen definitions of yoga, and very few of them have anything to do with what we think of as practice, unless, of course, our practice is magic or deceit or equipping an army by harnessing chariots. These are all definitions of yoga. In fact, the earliest definitions of yoga found in texts are talking about connecting a chariot to animals to go to war. Okay, if we come back to something that's a little bit more familiar, the idea of connection and connecting things more generally and perhaps in a yogic practical context, even those references are confusing. What's being connected to what? It depends on the text, it depends on the system. And is it even the solution to try and unite things? For Patanjali, union is the problem. Patanjali's solution is separation, to detach consciousness from matter, to isolate Purusha from Prakriti. So union is not his aim whatsoever. So we have to come back to that thing. If we're going to look at the texts, we'll find endless reasons to get more and more confused. There's not a monolithic tradition, and there's a lot of disagreement. So I noticed that in Geza's presentation before, he had a reference to Shankara, who was dismissing Patanjali's yogi. We often hear about Patanjali's sutras because they're the root of the yoga darshana, the yoga school of philosophy. There are other schools of philosophy, of course, and Shankara, one of the most influential philosophers of Vedanta, particularly Advaita Vedanta, and he ripped Patanjali to pieces. In his commentary on the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, he said, should the suppression of the fluctuations of the mind be practiced, because it has a different purpose from the self-realization generated by the sayings of the Vedas, and because it is enjoined in other texts, i.e. the Yoga Sutra? All a bit waffly, but the answer is pretty straightforward. No, because it's not considered a means to liberation. And he also says Patanjali's theory is flawed because it sees the world in terms of two separate entities. As he puts it in his Brahma Sutra commentary, by the rejection of the Samkhya tradition, on which Patanjali's method is based, the yoga tradition too has been rejected. That is because, contrary to revealed texts, i.e. the Vedas, the yoga school teaches that primordial nature is an independent cause, even though this is taught neither in the Vedas nor among the people. So what do we make of all that? Should we therefore always say that yoga means union, and that we should only ever be talking in terms of oneness, such as the underlying unity of Atman and Brahman? But where does that leave other forms of yoga, devotional forms of yoga, in which there is a separation between the practitioner and the deity? What about Buddhist yoga, where there's no self whatsoever? Or Jaina yoga, or Sufi yoga, or make your bum look good in swimwear yoga? Where do we pin it down? Yoga has to be defined in a context. As a result, though, we are faced with the problem that contexts change. Objectives change. Our objectives in this room are probably all rather different from one another, although they may be in a similar area. So with all these different methods and different purposes, it's very hard to say which one is right. It also means there's probably no way back to some one true yoga, some primordial state before it all got corrupted, that we can rewind to. Because throughout the history of yoga, ideas have been exchanged across different traditions. They've been copied and pasted, literally in some cases, from one text to another. Does that mean, though, that anything goes, that anyone can decide what yoga is and mix and match to their heart's content? Probably worth questioning whether it's yoga to get drunk or to have a goat pee on your mat, because that might not really help with the process of focusing inward, which is something that most texts about yoga are talking about. And it's certainly not going to help with the goal of transcending the mind, which is the underlying objective, to get beyond the things that are getting in the way of who we really are. Because that's the message that keeps coming through again and again. We heard it in that video from Godfrey Devereux. Self-inquiry, discovering who we really are underneath, resolving our confusion. So who are we? Should we become a somebody? Should we have millions of followers on social media? Or should we spend our time on Facebook berating those people who do that as imposters, fake yogis? Is that the yogic response, to spend a load of time denouncing others while implicitly promoting yourself and perhaps your business as a more purist approach, as plenty of people do? So this brings me to the focus of my talk, probably best summed up by the term the yoga police, the people who like telling others what to do, while not necessarily doing any of it themselves. I should probably clarify at this point that this isn't going to be a rant about being non-judgmental. I think it's very important to judge quite clearly what is what. Patanjali agrees. He says that's the path to liberation. The means to liberation in Yoga Sutra 226 is uninterrupted discriminative discernment, as the translation of Viveka has it in that version. It's very important, not just in his system, to know one thing from another. And it's also important to put things clearly. So I should just go ahead and say it. I think the yoga police are un-yogic. That's not going to say very much in and of itself. It really just turns the question upside down. If you're asking what is yoga, there is obviously, therefore, by extension, something that is not yoga, which is what I'm calling un-yogic. And I'm not, through that, trying to suggest that it's wrong to say that some things are wrong, although right and wrong is a slippery slope, as Chris was observing earlier. But it's still important to be discerning, to tell one thing from another, and particularly, we have a problem that abuse will thrive in contexts where people don't say one thing is right and another thing is wrong. Drawing boundaries is important, but what bothers me is self-righteous posturing, telling other people what is and isn't yoga. And there's a lot of it around, has been observed repeatedly today. I should probably sit down now, though, before I get into doing that myself, because walking a very... walking the razor's edge, as they say. I've been asked for an opinion, though, so here we go. It's unfortunately no surprise that I'm going to say yoga is self-inquiry. It really is, again and again, what's explained in texts. It's a process of looking inwards, an introspective process, an experiential transformation, an awakening into something that has to be explored. And even if Patanjali says that success in this practice can show you the minds of other people, I think most of us are probably struggling enough with dealing with our own. And even if we do get somewhere with it to the point that we have refined sensitivity, knowing what's going on in somebody else is very challenging thing, and I'm always very suspicious when people think they know. So I can't tell if somebody knows what yoga is from the outside, or whether they're doing it, whatever doing it might mean. I can only really focus on removing my own illusions that get in the way of me attaining a state of yoga. Telling other people that they've missed a point is not going to help me in that process, as has already been observed. And just to clarify again, I mean, with talking about right and wrong, it all sounds very black and white, but most questions of right and wrong are very grey areas. And they're personal matters again. Yoga really itself is personal, even if the outcome is to go beyond the personalised worldview, to step into something impersonal. How we choose to go about that, what works for us, what we need, is going to be a very different thing. And besides, if we're telling other people who's right and wrong, who tells us we're right and that we're not just deluding ourselves with more self-serving nonsense? The Upanishads have this all-purpose remedy for that problem. They keep coming back to the question of self-inquiry. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the earliest, says, "It is oneself which one should see and hear, and on which one should reflect and concentrate. For by seeing and hearing oneself, and by reflecting and concentrating on oneself, one gains the knowledge of this whole world." Sounds great, but how? There are very few techniques taught in early texts, which leads us again to a problem with today. We want to know how to do these things, and they're challenging. They defy description. Which of these is the self, asks the Aitareya Upanishad, and then rules out everything it suggests as another working of the mind. Is it that by which one sees, or hears, or smells, or speaks, or distinguishes between what is tasty and what is not? Is it the heart? Is it the mind? Is it awareness, perception, discernment, cognition, wisdom, insight, steadfastness, thought, reflection, drive, memory, intention, purpose, will, love, desire? Answer to all of those is no. It's beyond all that. So as the Kaushitaki Upanishad puts it, it's not the mind that the man should seek to apprehend. Rather, he should know the one who thinks, the witness of it all. Unfortunately, as Yajnavalkya points out in the Brihadaranyaka, it's hard to perceive the perceiver. In the Katha Upanishad, Death agrees, saying, "Rare is the man who knows it. It's much easier to get on your high horse and tell other people they're wrong." Now, I do think it matters to try and define what yoga is, and by extension, what it's not. I've even written a book about it, and that's going to be published soon. You can check my website. Oops. I've just outed myself as an un-yogic hypocrite, self-promoting, but it's danielsimpson.info in case you're interested. Anyway, back to the business of the talk. Let's sum up. The bell's going. Defining yoga is personal, even if the outcome is impersonal, beyond the limited self and its gratification. The highest proof of knowledge in yogic terms is direct perception. So it's very clear where we should focus our attention on that witnessing presence that transcends thought. So we're back to where we started, and I should sit down and shut up. Thanks for listening.
So we started with the chair of the IYN, and we're going to finish with the chair of the BWI, Richard Adamo.
How often do you ding this, by the way?
How often do I what?
Ding.
That? Oh, sorry. Yeah, you get a 2-minute warning before the end, and then second ding and you're out.
Cool. So I'll thank you very much for staying with us here. I know it's been a long day, isn't it now? Firstly, obviously, I've got to thank Debbie for inviting me here, and for all the work she's done in putting on this conference. It's really great. You know, it's fab. Also, as Daniel likes to provide a warning and clarification, anything I say here does not represent the views of the British School of Yoga. I am speaking as an individual. Having said that, it's great that I can be here as a British School of Yoga chair at an IYN conference, and I think that's fab. You know what I mean? For me, that's the true meaning of the words inclusion. You know what I mean? Is working together on things and respecting each other's points of views. Not that I even think we have a different point of view, actually. We can all hold disparate views and opinions, but having that freedom means that we should also allow other people the freedom to do the same, be it individuals, schools, or even organisations. So, what is yoga? which is a fab title for a conference because it's really wide-ranging, and I can wander off down any path I choose to go under that title. And funny enough, the table over the back there raised the question that I really think defines this, which is, what is yoga for? Because by answering that question, you will answer the other question, which is, what is yoga? Why do we do whatever we do that we consider to be yoga? And as other people have wondered, does it have to include goats? Okay. In my opinion, we start the great divide in different views and opinions by trying to work out what the word yoga means. Does it mean union, which is answer that most people would give, or does it mean control, binding, and restriction, which is really the meaning that's more comes out in terms of the Yoga Sutras? Look at it another way. Are you religious or atheistic? Take your pick and get the according meaning for your viewpoint. We can then consider the other question that I raised. What is yoga for? Is it to get closer to God, or is it, as I believe, a system for returning us to a state of health, physically, mentally, and emotionally? So I see the path of yoga as a sort of massive fitness program that works holistically, combining the strands of different aspects of ourselves to enable us to become more balanced individuals. Individuals who think for ourselves, are not afraid to stand away from the crowd and consider things from an independent viewpoint. An ethos for living life that allows us to be truthful to ourselves. A physical system of exercises that makes us strong, resilient and healthy. Breathing practices that help control the mind, and a certain detachment to our emotions that means we are not easily swayed by what goes on around us, where we're constantly being distracted away from what is really important in life, our personal health, happiness and contentment. If you want yoga therapy, then that's it. That is yoga as therapy. But it's a whole system you have to apply. I mean, this is no small task. The educational influences we're all subject to train us to work for 8 hours a day from quite young. You know, we're trained to sit at school for 6 hours a day at a desk without complaining. Double maths, 2 hours. You know what I mean? It's not about maths, it's about training us to endure sitting still and conforming. Yeah? The cultural influences of society try to shape our behaviour, so we're pressured to conform to norms that may not be for us. I mean, they might be for some people, but they're not for everybody. We're encouraged to live in cities where we're divorced from natural surroundings. Just in case we start to question things, there are a whole raft of treats we can have to distract ourselves. You know, nice things that we can have and places we can go, and any existential problems we may have identified can then be sorted out. And to make sure we're aware of these non-essential things, we have a massive advertising promotional industry dedicated to make sure we don't miss out and we can do what everybody else does. Should we actually go for professional help, then there's an NHS that can offer us counselling so we can carry on, and also drugs so that we can carry on, and it's a last-ditch attempt to keep us quiet. When we consider these factors, we can see why so many people are living an unhappy and unfulfilled lives. As I believe Farrar said, most people are living lives of quiet desperation, and that can be true. So, we come back to what yoga can do for us and how we can make life better. Firstly, it has to be understood that yoga is not a quick fix for our problems. Yoga may or may not be a religion, but it's certainly a discipline. Have I pressed anything? No, it's all too bad. We do yoga by practicing it. And that practice, according to the Yoga Sutras, needs to be pursued for a long period with a certain amount of effort. Like any training program, we only get the benefits out in the relations to the intensity of what we put in, as it points out in the Yoga Sutras. The system Hatha Yoga makes this clear. Any person who is not lethargic in the practice and pursuit of yoga gets results, be they young, old, or even very old. Progress is not achieved by wearing the dress of a yogi or by talking about it, although that can be useful. Practice alone is the cause of success. So, we move towards physical health, which is the bedrock on which the foundations of the rest of the yoga system is built. Mental stability and detachment comes from this, as well as being reinforced and developed by the breathing exercises. Once the physical and mental systems are balanced, the emotional system becomes stable. Detachment is not a sort of idea, but a result from practice. It's not just something that we can intellectually appreciate, but something that grows through the experience of our own resilience to challenges that we face and live through. When we have a record of dealing with difficult problems and surviving, maybe even growing by facing them, then we become emotionally stronger. We train ourselves through the practice of asana and pranayama to become resilient. Now, the problem with all of this is that it's difficult to sell to people who are still hooked into the quick fix method that seems to be the norm. Yoga is not a life hack, but a lifelong practice. The system responds very slowly to input, and change is like moving a barge. A big push gets you nowhere. What is needed is a steady force applied over a long period. The barge will gradually begin to move, and once it happens, there's a certain momentum that makes it almost hard to stop. Once the practice of yoga has become truly ingrained, it's not an effort to practice anymore, but an effort not to practice. Whereas once we gave up yoga for other things, we move into a situation where we give up other things to do yoga. Before you know it, you've become a yoga teacher, changed your life, and got rid of all negative and unhelpful influences, and lived happily ever after. So, this is what yoga is for, and whatever it is we practice, then it's within the confines of a system if it provides us with these attributes. The other thing is that when we look at the practices that define yoga, we come to aspects that stand out as being unique to yoga. Lifestyle guidance and ethical constraints go on in lots of religions and systems. Meditation and concentration exercises are also widespread. Less common are breathing exercises. However, asana, and by asana I mean asana combined with breath and self-awareness, performed in a manner that requires effort but pays no heed to the results of the practice, is something that defines yoga and is not found anywhere else. So, my answer is that yoga is asana and asana is yoga. And if you want to know if your asana practice is on the right path, then you need to work out if it provides the benefits that are supposed to go along with the practice, and then you will have your answer. There is another factor to consider here. The uncomfortable truth is that although we all love yoga and benefit from its practice, it's not for everybody. We are yoga teachers and practitioners, and as such we probably waste our time extolling the benefits of the system. Much of this seed falls on stony and waste ground and deaf ears. I think, as the Buddha says, we need to be a light unto ourselves. We end up being our own advertising, though it's still possible to use Facebook in case you're desperate. By setting an example, others will follow. When people think that we can be even-minded through all sorts of difficulties, look good for our age, do many things that people much younger than us struggle with, and have an energy and vigour that shines through, then we can talk about the benefits of yoga. For myself, I'd rather teach 5 students who are involved in serious about their yoga than 20 who were just turning up so they said they did yoga as some sort of lifestyle choice. But you end up with the students you deserve, as they say. Having practiced yoga myself for some 30 odd years, in common with lots of other people who've spoken here today, I've had lots of changes that I attribute to yoga practice. And interestingly, even though my practice has been really asana based, I can see other things that have improved. My concentration has improved, my health is good, I'm much more able to finish things, something which I really struggled with when I was younger. I was very good at starting things, by the way. I could always do that, but I couldn't actually finish things and see things through. My self-confidence has improved. And going along with that, I care less about what other people think. But more concerned that I do the right thing for myself. And as I get older, I value more and more the ability to do things and the mental endurance and physical strength and flexibility that has its roots in asana practice. The truth is, I do yoga so I can do everything else that I like to do. Like Ellen with her gardening. You know, if I just did yoga so I could do yoga, I don't think I'd be as excited about it. In my 60s, I started doing gymnastics, albeit for adults. I started kayaking, sailing. You know, life's good. It's going on, man. And, that's fantastic. And, to just put this in context and tie it together for you guys, I consider that this practice of yoga has given me this gift, all right? It's like someone coming up to you with a platter and going, here we are. Here's another 10 or 15 years of vital, active life that's yours for the taking if you follow and practice this system, okay? That's, not something to be taken lightly, all right? You can argue what you want about what yoga is. What I want to know is what yoga does, all right? And if yoga does that, then it's all good. It's all good. I've heard lots of great things that other speakers have said. I'm sitting there going, yeah, and I really agree with. We've had a great discussion on therapy, yoga is therapy, and I think yoga is a therapy, okay? But it doesn't have to be called a therapy to be a therapy. It is a therapy because of its multifaceted nature. And almost, what's that, 2 minutes left? Almost by its holistic and varied nature, it gets in all sorts of places that maybe a more narrowly defined system of yoga wouldn't do. Okay, you destroy the system if you take a bit out of it. And much of what Jim had to say earlier really resonated with me, and I believe it. I've always had a job alongside yoga teaching and training. Okay, not only does it allow me to keep and other people our integrity, but it does also go some way to circumvent the sort of industrialization. It's not even commercialization, it's industrialization of yoga that's going on. Those people like Ellen and Jim, myself, and other people who've been practicing yoga for that length of time, if you'd have said to us 30 years ago, you can go into yoga, you can make some money out of it, we'd have laughed in your face because it just wasn't there, okay? Nowadays, that's not true. People go into yoga because they think they can make money out of it. And they do, they want to start a studio. Never had a yoga studio. 30 years ago, no yoga studios. We didn't have them. All right, the world has changed, okay? And, some of that change is good, all right? But some of that change is like damaging to the essence of what I consider to be yoga to be. And, now the idea of making a living out of teaching yoga is quite commonplace, all right? I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm just pointing out the change. I'm pointing out the change. And with this pressure, it can become as much about what you can sell as about what you genuinely have to offer, as a teacher. And that's harmful for yoga, I believe, okay? We should stick to what we're good at, frankly. And, hence the proliferation of all these novelty forms of yoga and the keenness for us to get out yoga as medicine. The format goes, run out a new form of yoga, or yoga for a new form of specialist group, advertise it, run out a teacher training program, take the money out of a teacher training program. Who gives a shit if there's no work for the people at the end who've actually gone under this? Because you're finished, man. My job's done. I'm off, and I've taken the money and gone. All right? That's what happens. Okay? That's the way it's going, unless you're careful. Hence, as people have done loads of teacher training programs on all sorts of things and still haven't got a clue what they're doing. So, I don't really care if yoga is popular or not, but I do want it to be genuine. Okay? I do want it to be genuine. And I know what yoga's done for me. As a teacher, I want to transmit onto my students. As a teacher trainer, I want at least some of the people I train to be teachers to transmit that onto their students as well. And you know, that's what I see as the holistic nature of yoga, is that it works in that way. You know, Patanjali says yoga's freedom and independence, okay? You know, we have a lot of shit to deal with in life all the time. All stuff comes at us. And you know, we've got to be resilient to deal with this stuff and stand up to it. And to enable us to live with strength, independence and freedom, yeah, I see that as the results of yoga practice. Yeah. Cool. Have I finished on time? Just a bit late. Thank you, Mum.